Hi, I'm Selena Woodward, and I'm an English and drama teacher, university lecturer, and with edufolios.org, a big-time reflective practitioner. So how can reflective practice help you grow your teaching skills, fall in love with your profession all over again, and help you nail accreditation and teacher registration with less stress and less work? Well, this is the Reflective Teacher Podcast. Welcome back to the Reflective Teacher Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Selena Woodward, and I am very excited today to be joined by New Yorker Jen Rafferty. She is sitting in 0 degrees while I boil away at 30. It's a very strange world we live in. And Jen is coming to us from the Empowered Educator. Now, I've brought Jen onto the podcast because we connected, we started talking, and we couldn't stop talking, which usually means that we have a lot in common and there's a lot of exciting stuff to cover. So Jen, I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to let you tell the listeners all about your amazing PhD research into cognitive neuroscience with teachers, not the kids, we do enough of that, but like, what are you learning about teachers and your cognitive neuroscience studies, and why on earth did you end up doing this research in the first place?
Well, thank you for having me. Any opportunity to get a chance to talk about brains makes me really excited. So I started my journey teaching at Ithaca College, and I studied to be a music teacher. And I actually did a semester at Griffith University. So I spent quite some time in Brisbane, and I loved my time in Australia so much. I can't wait to come back. And then, when I started my first teaching job, I felt really prepared with content and pedagogy and philosophy. And I walked in really thinking I was going to change the world. And very quickly, I learned with my middle school students, 7th, 8th, 9th graders, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th graders, that, I didn't know who they were developmentally. And I was missing something. And I realized that it was their development that was a part of the problem. I didn't know what their brains were going through, the profound changes that were happening to them. And I thought that if I understood that more, I could do my content, pedagogy, and philosophy a little bit better and be a more effective teacher. So that's how the research started, about learning about cognitive development in adolescence. And throughout my teaching career, I realized that there was a lot of stuff that teachers needed and wanted and weren't able to get. And I started thinking about how mindset and emotional intelligence and this cognitive neuroscience piece could all be interrelated in some way to help teachers show up for themselves better and to help ultimately serve their students better.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of us listening who really want to know how this connects to the standards, of course, then, we're talking here about knowing kids and how they learn, and the knowing kids and the developmental milestones they go through. I mean, I've studied a little bit of the adolescent neuroscience too, because I found it really fascinating, like all of those pathways in the brain disconnecting. That's why they turn into sort of grunting Neanderthals for a little bit. That's while they rewire their brain. There's a lot going on right up until like your early 20s, like there's a huge amount of rewiring that goes on. And it's really important that you understand that, because, you can't really blame a grumpy teenager for feeling the way they are when you realize just how much work their brain is doing, how tired they're going to be, how many processes they're reconnecting. So I totally get that. And I had a very similar journey myself in my early career. But what I love is that you've then gone, hey, hang on a moment. There's a load of teachers out there who not only need to understand this, but also we can use this to examine ourselves as educators and how we're looking after ourselves. So you have a very different way of looking at that, which I think is fantastic. So with your work in Empowered Educator, what do you work with teachers on now, specifically in Empowered Educator space?
So regarding the cognitive neuroscience piece, that's a big part of what I do at the Empowered Educator. We talk about how to leverage neuroplasticity to change yourself and in regards to how you show up in this world. There's so much focus on the kids, and that's wonderful. We're teachers. We need to focus on the kids. That's our job. However, there is a huge gap in understanding what teachers need for them to learn more about how they show up, how their brains work, how they learn about things. So I've kind of flipped this on its head in this way. So my degree through my doctorate is actually in educational psychology. And what I do is I marry educational psychology with this cognitive neuroscience piece and having elements of mindset and emotional intelligence to create this empowered educator program, which ultimately provides a way for teachers to have a better understanding of their overall well-being and allows them to show up in the classroom the way that they want to.
That's really interesting, because in the work that I do as a coach, I often come across teachers who are not neuroplastic. They don't have that. They don't have that understanding. And when I think of neuroplasticity, I think of growth mindset and Carol Dweck and all her work. And we're really big on that with our kids, you know, making mistakes, falling into the pit and being in the pit and coming back out. That's a huge thing. And yeah, when it comes to teacher accreditation and trying to put together your evidence, a lot of teachers won't fall into the pit. They're not prepared to go into the pit. They're not prepared to make any mistakes. They think they have to do it perfectly. They try and go from 0 to highly accomplished without any practice in between. Which is a huge ask, and it hurts the brain for obvious reasons, you know. So I think you're quite right. But I think for the listeners out there who aren't familiar with the term neuroplasticity, can you just go over that for us? What do you mean by that?
Sure. So our brains aren't stagnant. We have an incredible ability to make change as much as we want. We aren't the way we are just because that's the way we are. We're actually the way we are because it's the way we think we are.
Okay.
And understanding that difference gives you so much agency in the choices that you make in your life. For example, I'm not a morning person, right? I mean, how many times have you heard people say that? Right?
I say that all the time.
Okay.
Yeah. That's just an excuse not to get out of bed really early though, right? No?
Right. So we say this, right? And then it becomes part of our disposition. It becomes part of our personality. Oh, well, I'm just not a morning person. The truth is, you're that way because you say you're that way, because you think you're that way. And what neuroplasticity does, if you're able to leverage it in the way that we do in the work that I do, you can change that narrative about whatever you want. Actually, neurologically in your brain.
Yeah.
Because, ultimately your brain's only job is to make sure that you survive. That's its main purpose. Your brain doesn't care if you're thriving, if you're learning new things, if you're having fun, if you're happy. It just cares that you're alive. Mm-hmm. And everything else is your responsibility because you are not your brain. You are a person who has a brain. And once you're able to understand the working relationship with your brain, that's when you can start to make real change. And then when you get into things like reflective practice, which can be hard and confronting, you start to understand that you can't change things you don't notice. So you become really grateful for some of these blunders that you make because you've noticed them. And that's when you really start to grow without creating meaning about it. Because I made a mistake doesn't mean I'm a bad teacher. It doesn't mean I'm not smart enough. It doesn't mean that I'm not good enough to be in this career. All it is, it's data, it's evidence. So in understanding this and understanding this idea of neuroplasticity, where we can actually change the way our brain functions in regards to how we think and how we function in this world, anything's possible.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It really is. And I totally understand what you're saying there in my personal life too. Like there are things that I do that I don't even realize I'm doing. And I'm having to work on that, like, oh, I've done it again. Like my favorite one, I apologize all the time when it's really not necessary. So many women do that. Anyone else? Like I apologize all the time. And my current goal is to not do that anymore. And I'm working on catching myself doing it before I do it, but I still can't do that yet. I can notice it the minute I do it and go, oh, I did it again. Oh, but I haven't quite got to the point where I can stop myself, so it's like this process of rewiring that pathway. is really fascinating. I don't know if I thought I'd share that little vulnerability in case anyone else could relate. It seems pretty common.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I'm so glad you did, because it highlights this example that, really 95 to 97% of the time that we're kind of like going about our lives, it's subconscious.
Yeah.
Our subconscious is running the show, and only 3 to 5% is conscious.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're creating, when you notice, you pause, right? And I did it again. However, the trick to that is to give yourself grace and get rid of the judgment about it.
Yeah.
And instead feel gratitude. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I noticed that.
Yeah. Well, my friends and I have a great time with it, because if I go out for drinks with them and I do it, we both go, oh, you did it again. Then we laugh a lot. And then one of my friends will go, tell me, why did you apologize? She wants to know what it was that was behind it. And it's really fun, actually.
Yeah.
It's become quite a silly thing for us. Yeah. It's good.
Yeah. Yes. It's all good. You want to strengthen that noticing muscle, which is why, when you're focusing, especially on this reflective practice, it's data.
Yeah.
Right?
You're noticing, you're creating space to notice stuff. And you know what, in terms of efficacy and confidence, there are so many teachers that I work with who have all these stories in their head about how they might not be very good, and they're waiting to do their proficiency, their full registration even, and they're waiting 3 to 5 years and delaying it because they're not quite sure that they're good. And that's because they're not giving themselves the space and the time to notice that it's too scary to notice. That's a bit scary to notice. They've told themselves the story, and so the idea of noticing becomes a bit of a block, a problem. So I think reflective practice, the work we do at Edufolios, has become that piece to let teachers celebrate, to let them come out of their shell, to let them really understand what is good in their classroom, use that to boost themselves, and then understand that when they see something going wrong, that's a great opportunity for changing it and doing it differently. Because of course, if you don't notice what's going on, because it's unconscious, not conscious, you're going to keep repeating those patterns, and you're actually going to start creating problems for the kids in your classroom, right? Is that what you'd say?
Yeah. So, well, yeah, and a lot of that resistance that you're talking about, I want to kind of go back there for a second, because I think you hit on something really important. That resistance is actually fear. And I want to talk about that for a second, because we don't think about resistance or procrastination or sometimes even overwhelm as being fear. And what's happening is, again, because your brain's main job is to make sure that you stay alive, anything that it perceives as being threatening immediately initiates that fight, flight, or freeze response. Your amygdala, right, that part of your brain that's responsible for that stress response, is engaged even for something like, I have to have this reflective practice right now, and I'm feeling really vulnerable about it. And the reason is because that part of your brain hasn't evolved much since the days we were hunting and gathering and being chased by bears. So your brain literally thinks you're being chased by a bear, even though you're doing this reflective practice. And it's really, right? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but when you're thinking about it like this, it makes so much sense, right? Because you have that stress response and your body tightens up. You start to sweat, right? I'm a big sweater when like my stress response happens, like, right? Your breathing gets a little bit shallow, your stomach, we all know what this feels like. And because your brain is so good at protecting you, fear shows up in things like resistance, things like, I don't have the time, I'm too overwhelmed, I don't have time. Things like procrastination. And unless you're really vigilant about noticing, hey, I'm putting this off, I'm sensing some resistance here, isn't that interesting? What's going on? Only then can you discover, okay, I'm about to grow. I'm about to go out of my comfort zone, and my amygdala is activated because it thinks I'm in danger. And danger is different than fear. Okay. And that's a lot of the big concept, and a lot of the foundation of what I talk about, is because fear is everywhere. Yeah. It's everywhere. And in recognizing that, you can work with it.
Okay. Yeah. Because then you notice it and you can make a conscious choice rather than being unconsciously driven by it. You get the chance to make a conscious choice rather than being ruled by it, which as someone who likes to be in control, I find it very irritating that my brain likes to take control. How rude. I'm in control.
Right?
Thank you very much.
Yes. I mean, thank you for keeping me alive, but like,
Yes,
I got this.
seriously, I really want to do this. It's not a bear. Calm down. Cool yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. Oh, good. I love that. Okay. So when it comes to reflective practice, if we manage to retrain our brain and not think there's a bear chasing us, and we take the plunge and we take the opportunity to consciously notice, to give ourselves the space to consciously notice what's going in our classroom, what's going on in our classroom, to write, to talk. What does your research show us about the process of writing? And I ask this because in other psychology things that I'm aware of, you often get asked to journal even about your own life and the way your brain is thinking. And I'm guessing this is about noticing. So is there anything coming up in the research about the process of writing things down, whether that be on a keyboard or with a pen? Is there anything coming up that's interesting around that and cognitive neuroscience or neuroplasticity?
Well, I think, the research around reflection is slightly different than the research in cognitive neuroscience, but
Okay.
there is something to be said that anytime that you can engage more of your senses, you are creating memories in different places. Anytime that you can connect information with emotion or information with story or information and some sort of sensory stimuli,
Okay.
it's going to be stored differently. And, I used to be a big typer, but I've noticed more and more, and I tell the people I work with to do this also, is that pen to paper is really that it makes a different connection here in your heart and you're on a deeper level than you would just typing on a device. The more that you can share what's inside and put it on the outside, again, the more evidence that you have to notice, right? Because it's always going to be about strengthening that noticing muscle.
Yeah.
So getting it out is a huge part of it, because you have about 85,000 thoughts every single day. And it's all the same, usually every day. It's all the same. And yeah, and they're mostly coming from fear, ego, or past experiences, right?
Okay.
You're just affirming the same stories over and over and over and over again. And to use that example, even just like I'm not a morning person, right? Keeping that story going in your mind, like, okay, you got up late, then that kind of set the tone for the rest of the day. That story is just affirmed over and over and over in your head. So doing this work internally isn't a great idea.
because so many teachers do that. They come to the evidence engine course and they're like, I got loads of stuff. Where is it? In my head. I'm like, okay. Or they've gathered little pieces of paper and they've shoved them in a box. So they've found samples of kids' work, or they found something they think is interesting, but that's as far as they've gone. They haven't actually connected what was going on in their head to why they put that thing in the box. So they'll either have this box of things and they think, that's it, now I've done it, I've got things, or it's just in their head, and that's where they stop. So this is really interesting. Yeah. And I could see, based on what you think about the fear, that's telling us where the point of resistance is, how strong that point of resistance is, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. So keep telling us more. So when we get it out of our head, what happens?
Right. So when you find that resistance, that's when you get to stop and be like, oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And then make a new choice. And there's, we can go into how to make a new choice, because you can't just like think happy thoughts and like think positive thoughts and then everything's, magical. It doesn't work that way. There's a process for that. But I can talk about that later or at another time. But, once it's out on paper, well, then you actually have something to go back to, and you can watch yourself grow.
Yes.
You don't have the context if you don't get it out of your head, because you're in your head all the time. So you don't necessarily see the true evolution of your growth unless there's tangible evidence for it. And I think part of the resistance also comes from maybe not understanding the value of writing it down, where it's like, oh, I don't have to do that. I mean, when I first started doing research about reflective practice, I would do kind of like a call out to some of these teacher Facebook groups, and I'd be like, hey, so what's your reflective practice? And more often than not, I'd have a lot of teachers say, well, on the car ride home, sometimes I cry.
Yeah.
Like, okay, it's great that you feel your feelings, but write things down so you have an idea of like, well, what happened? Why are you feeling this way? And then you can actually do something about it, and make some progress. I have other teachers who say the same things. Well, I think about it before I go to sleep. Well, that's also fine, but you're not sleeping.
Yeah.
You're sleeping. And again, there's no evidence of where you are, so where you're going and where you've been, in this journey. And I really think of, this as a journey. We're always moving forward.
Yep.
But if you don't have a clear idea of where you're going, you're just kind of blowing in the winds, like that, Forrest Gump feather at the beginning of the movie, which I know I have to be careful with my references. Not everyone knows Forrest Gump. So,
well, if they don't,
but you know what I'm talking
about. It's important.
Right. Please watch Forrest Gump.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that entirely. And I love the fact that, it's an opportunity to see yourself grow. But when you're also focusing on, say, for example, you went to a PD, you learned something that you want to put into your classroom practice. So you write a reflective post about the PD just to give that context, and you start connecting the dots between your setting at school and what you've been learning, and you set yourself some ideas, some targets. Then you actually put it into practice. And then not only can you see your growth as a practitioner using these new tools, but you can start looking at the kids' growth and the impact that that's having on them too, which is really important for the accreditation process, because here in Australia, when you're going for any level of accreditation, it's very rarely about you. The story isn't actually about you. It's about your kids, the impact you're having on your colleagues, the impact you're having on your site. But you're absolutely right. If you don't, as you tell those stories, you also can be proud of yourself because it's visible. You can see the impact that you're making, and that affirms you and helps you to understand that you are a good teacher, and any stories you've got in your head are wrong. And one of the things that I find really interesting is in my edufolio, I often write about things that go horribly wrong. So workshops I teach where I've called people by the wrong name, or, I've brought up the wrong resources, all the stuff that always happens. And the number of times I've done PD and I've shared some posts like that, and teachers have gone, oh, but doesn't your principal just think you're really bad at your job? And I'm like, no, my principal knows that when I make a mistake, I don't sit with that in my head and carry that for the rest of the term or the rest of the year, which is what I used to do. I would have that narrative, or you're a bit crap with year 9, or no, in the next lesson with year 9 would be a disaster because I've already decided I don't know how to teach year 9, and it self goes round and round and round and round. Instead, I write it all down. I might cry a little bit, and by letting it out, it gives it a chance to go away, because I can learn a lesson from it that I can take forward. So my narrative becomes, right, next time I'm going to try this, not, oh God, that was a disaster, I hated it, blah, blah, blah. So there's definitely, in my practice, there's definitely evidence to back up what you've just said. Absolutely. It's so important for me because I am someone who internalizes every bit of negative energy and loves to carry it around and torture myself with it. And it just slows me down and weighs me down. It doesn't help me and it doesn't help my kids. So I totally get that.
Yeah,
the other thing.
Helpful. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yes.
The other thing that really interested me was the fact that you said, you're building up this story of your progress. And that interests me because right now we're starting a new school year here. And we've got loads and loads of uni students who finish their portfolio at the graduate standard, who now email support and go, how do I delete all of that? I don't want that in my portfolio anymore. I just want to start now on the next career stage. I want all that gone. And I'm like, what? No. Like, that data contains information for you to know what your targets are for the first term of teaching. So like if that data showed that your strengths were X, Y, and Z, use that. And if it shows your growth spots were blah, 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 that's what you talk to your mentor about. Like, did you have real strengths in behavior management, but you had growth areas in understanding Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander cultures and how to apply that? Well, go up to your principal, your mentor, and say, hey, here's the data. Here's what I need help with. I tell you now,
they will be blown away by you. They'll be like, oh, crikey, she really knows what she's talking about. Great. Okay, great. You're going to really impress them. But there is this mindset that I've done that. I didn't really like it. It was probably quite painful because of the way the uni got me to do it. And now I just want to disown it. Do you come across that a lot as well in your research? Like the separation of all these stages, and like, I'm done with that now. I need to be an entirely different new person with a clean slate or something. I'm not sure.
Well, I think again, it's affirming kind of what you said about these narratives that we tell and the meaning that we make of them, right?
Yep.
So it's this meaning that's attached to this that's causing a resistance to it, or kind of just and not even paying attention. I don't need to see this thing anymore, instead of recognizing it and reframing this as this is a piece of my journey. This is a piece of my past. This is a process. And by deleting this thing, I'm actually deleting a huge part of who I am right now in this journey. You have all of this evidence of who you were, and creating that reframe is really important. The thing is still going to be there, but looking at it as some sort of dark spot in your career doesn't seem to be helpful. So if there's a way to reframe that as some way that you can use it as a tool to continue to help you move forward, that's great. But that takes some noticing, right? And some choosing to do that. And that's difficult, because you're right. You get stuck on that negative loop because, again, your brain just wants to keep you alive. It is built to find the gaps. It is built to hang on to those negative stories, because that is a surefire way that you are not changing, that you are not growing, that you will stay safe and the same and that's it. So that's why when a million things can go right, that one thing can go wrong, and that is the only thing that you will be thinking for the rest of that day, right?
Yeah. And if you don't release it, if you, like, as a high school English teacher, it might have been period 1 with my nutty year 8s, say, for example, and it all went wrong. People were swearing, had to call senior leadership, blah, 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 blah. And then I've got my beautiful year 7s or my top set year 11s, and I'm really not in a good place to work with them. I'm already like, I'm carrying that all day, that happens. That's life. And then it gets to the point where sometimes you have a class that you just cannot face. And I've coached and mentored people in schools where they're just crying because they've got to go back into that classroom. It's got that bad. Their fight flight response has got that bad. So I totally get that.
So you're right. And then you're that way in your body the whole day. And then you're showing up for that class that you really love. And your lens is that of stress and overwhelm and frustration and anxiety. And you're not able to show up the way that you need you to do and they need you to do.
And what you want to do as well. Like, nobody wants to be in that place.
Nobody wants to be there, right? So, understanding that you have agency in this. So, you have that difficult class. You take a moment to actually calm down your nervous system, right? So your nervous system now is in the sympathetic state. It is in fight, flight, or freeze. And it sounds ridiculous because just you had a bad class, right? You're not in danger. You're not going to die. But that's what your nervous system thinks is going on. Yeah. So one of the practical things that I do, and I do this throughout the day, is I set an alarm and I do breathing throughout my day. Okay. And this way that I do it is a box breath. It's in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And I do that 3 rounds. And in doing that, you're actually able to calm your nervous system down from the sympathetic state to a parasympathetic nervous state where it's not activated anymore. Because when your nervous system is in that sympathetic state and it's in that fight, flight, or freeze, you actually lose access to your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that's responsible for higher order thinking, problem solving, creativity, organizing, prioritizing, like all that stuff you need to like do the things that you want to do. Yeah. You literally don't have access to it, right? Yeah. So unless you are purposely calming your nervous system down, you're not able to function the way that you want to. No. So the reason why I have these alarms set up throughout the day is because it doesn't matter if I do this, yoga meditation in the morning, life happens during the day. Yeah. And so, even when I was in the classroom as a music teacher, I would have, 80 7th and 8th graders in front of me for choir. Yeah. And, the alarm would go off and be like, Ms. Rafferty needs to breathe right now, guys. And we would all do it. And what they would realize is that self-regulation tool was so helpful for them that it was like, it took a little while to create this culture. Like, this is what we do here in chorus class, right? But once they did it, they wanted to do it because they understood that they felt better. They would do it before they had a test. They would do it after lunch when they had a conflict with another friend. And so this really small thing can be a game changer anytime you're feeling that resistance or that overwhelm or frustration come up, which is really, as we know right now, is that fear just being a little bit sneaky.
Yeah, it's a great little technique to help you bring yourself back into yourself, to ground yourself enough so that you can make a choice, right? So that you're not driven by that fear. So when you're thinking, I don't have time for this, it's too hard, I'm feeling overwhelmed by the accreditation process, there's a story in my head that I'm not good enough to even begin this process, having something like a tool like that to help you take stock, take a minute, and then make that brave choice, as it might feel like a brave choice to get going, is really, really important. Absolutely. I think that's really cool.
And the more you notice, so the reason why I do this during the day is because the more you notice, A, what it feels like when you're calm, but more importantly, B, what it feels like when you're not. Because we're all so used to just carrying on with our day, right? We carry on, we push through, we keep it together, but our nervous systems are just jacked up all the time.
Oh my God, I've got to tell you a story. So that is me. And I would say for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been in a permanent stress state, and it's been terrible. And so I read a really cool book called Burnout, Burnout, Burnout by the Nagotsky sisters, right? And so I started reading that one, and I started looking at the different ways you can break the stress cycle. So one of them, when I first started doing it, it was so funny. I used to call it my Disney princess moment. This is when I knew I was no longer stressed, because I'd go for a run and then suddenly I would notice the birds and they would all be beautiful and the world would slow down. And I'm like, oh, I'm not stressed. And I was like, I'm here, I'm present, I'm not in my head, I'm not telling it, there's not 1,000 stories. And I would call it, it's like the Disney princesses standing in the garden singing a song. That's very silly. But, that's exactly what it was like for me. And it took me a while to learn the difference between me being stressed and me being okay and back in myself, which is really bad, right? But that is how much I would push myself and how much I would just keep going. And I'm sure there are plenty of teachers out there who can relate to that, I hope everyone has a Disney princess moment in their day, at least once a day,
Please, but Selena, you're right. And especially since COVID, I mean, let's be real. Everyone is stressed. Everyone is stressed. It's not just you, it's everyone. And, this is a practice. It's not like, one day you're empowered and then it's it, this is something that for me, I personally practice this every single day because my brain always wants to feed me stories of things that are not helpful for my growth and expansion and how I want to create impact in this world. And I know now that I'm not my thoughts. I'm not my brain. I know what's happening to my body, and it's not perfect, right? The idea of noticing the thing happening and noticing, sometimes there's a big gap in between, and the idea is just kind of close the gap as much as possible. So that's what we're always working towards,
And I guess it's why it's called reflective practice, because it is something that you practice. And that's why it's really hard to come to an accreditation process where you're being asked to reflect if you haven't practiced reflecting and gone through all this, it's really uncomfortable, let me make a choice, and got used to the process, worked out what works for you, how it works for you, allowed yourself to feel those good vibes from the celebration moments, allowed yourself to not attach stories when there's something that you need to grow, and practice that. So then when you get to that point where you're producing evidence, reflective pieces for accreditation, it doesn't feel so terrifying because you're not trying to overcome all of that cognitive stuff whilst also putting yourself in a position where you're being assessed on what you're doing. So, I think that's why it's called reflective practice. And what you're saying about taking it out of your head and writing it down, giving you that context so that you can make conscious choices. means, I guess, you're going to reduce the number of stories in your head. Does it reduce the stress eventually as well? Is that kind of what happens? She's laughing. She's laughing. That's a no then. Does it? Or do we just find other things to stress about? I'm just thinking, well, once you go on.
It's such a good question. So here's the thing, this work doesn't eliminate the stressors, right?
Okay.
The stressors are the external things.
Yeah.
What it does, it creates a reframe for you.
Yeah. Okay.
And so you are the only one who gets to choose whether or not you want to approach this in stress, overwhelm, anxiety, and frustration, or is there a different story that you can share here, right? You're not, okay, I'll give you an example. I was working with a teacher. I have some one-on-one clients that I work with that I coach also. And there was one woman who was saying, listen, there was this one class that I had. She was a first-year teacher at this new school. She had 15 years experience, but she was new at this one school. She was having a really hard time with this one class. And she needed help. She needed backup. So she wanted her principal to come in. And she said, I don't know what the right thing to do is. Will the principal undermine me in the classroom? And she said, so what do I do? So I said, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do. First of all, I said, but here's how you can frame this. You can attach the narrative of, I guess I need to call the principal to come in and she's going to undermine me. And now what do I do? Or you can say, you know what? I have 15 years experience. I know that a good teacher asks for help when she needs it. So I'm going to call my principal because this is how I roll here. And it's the same situation, but it's how we attach these narratives to it, change our whole energy to how we approach the situation. And so, when that happened, then the class reacted differently. She felt differently about herself. And it's that reframe that is essential to this. And you can't do that unless you're reflective in how these stories come about. And the only way to know about the stories is to write them down and to get them out of your head.
Get them out of your head. Absolutely. And it's really interesting because in the evidence engine, a lot of people will join the evidence engine with the goal of completing HA, graduate proficient, one of the levels. And they're with me for 8 weeks. And the very first module is about mindset, and it's about reflection and why we need to reflect and some of the stuff that we're talking about here. And usually by the biggest problem that I have in all the coaching sessions, or the biggest barrier that we have in all the coaching sessions, is totally mindset. So there will always be one or two people who will argue with me, and I have to keep reframing it all the time. And what we do at Edufolios is that we reframe it. We take it away from the paperwork and the I've got to do this because it's mandated, and we move it back to this is your opportunity to tell your story and to see if the standards can help you understand, recognize patterns and understand what you're doing. So we're actually totally reframing it using a boring government rubric to help educators see what's actually happening and in turn gather evidence, which is totally relevant and applicable to any of the accreditation processes. So I think it's really cool. Like what you're saying is really affirming that process for me that we have in the way we flip that. Because that's why we have so many educators who feel less overwhelmed and who, because they've removed that fear, because they're coaching with me and they're coming out the other side with another mindset. And often they'll get to the end. I had one guy last year who said, even just writing it down means I'm not carrying it around all the time. And I feel so much better. And if that's all I've taken away, then that's awesome. I'll get to HA when I'm ready, but I feel so much better because it's out of my head. So that echoes exactly what you're saying. I've had another person, a couple of people get to the end of the course and go, right, I was going to do this on what I've been doing in the last 5 years, but now I see it will be easier if I start and do it as I'm going. So I'm going to make a plan. And as I'm teaching, I'm going to gather the evidence and I'm going to reflect on it as it happens, because I think that'll be faster, because I'm actually in the moment with the context and I can get deeper with it, right? Does that make sense? It seems to connect really well with what you're saying in your research.
Absolutely. And again, understanding that the stories that you tell about these original narratives that kind of make this thing frustrating or overwhelming or something you want to resist to, again, it's about creating a different story about it. You can show up differently. And I have to say something here too, because this comes up in a lot of the work that I do here, is that this is not toxic positivity. This is not take a look at this thing that, is causing me pain, and just switching my thoughts about it. So we all feel good. That's emotional bypass. And that's not what needs to happen. That's toxic positivity. It's recognizing this is causing me pain. That's interesting. Why? What's the story that I'm telling myself right now about what this thing means? What meaning am I making? Because let's be real here too. Nothing means anything unless we make it mean something.
We make our own reality, right? Yeah.
Nothing means anything unless we give it meaning. So what meaning am I giving this thing? And then how can I reframe this so it can serve me and my greater purpose here? Yeah. And that's the big difference. And that, again, going back to this neuroplasticity piece, we're constantly falling into those old narratives because it's habit. Our brain's so efficient. So we're going to fall into those brain patterns and those connections just automatically. Yeah. So, I've heard this from someone, and her work's wonderful. Her name is Tracy Litt. And she describes this as, you're on top of a mountain, a snowy mountain, which there are a lot of in central New York right now, by the way. And so you have, you have this pair of skis and you've been going on the ski slope for quite some time. So you go to the top and you automatically go to the right, and you go to the top and you automatically go to the right, and you go to the top and you automatically go to the right. And in order to make a new choice, you actually have to stop for a second on top of that mountain and consciously go left. Yeah. And it is not a clear path at that point. There's, in fact, no path at that point. And then you have to get up, and then you have to stop and choose it again. And then you want to go to the left so badly because that's what you've been doing. And so what eventually happens, if you're constantly making that conscious choice to go in that other direction, that's where the pathway is going to be. And that other pathway is going to be filled up with snow again. Yeah. And it takes that moment to pause and just choose a different story that will then change your reality to how you see any situation.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great little metaphor analogy. I love that. Absolutely. That is very true in all sorts of things in any kind of psychology, isn't it? But it's definitely true with reflective practice because it is practice. You got to get that trail going, and it feels scary and dark to start with, but then eventually you'll know to recognize that tree on the left and whatever, like it'll become more and more familiar and it'll just happen. And we do have people who tell us they're addicted to reflecting on their practice because they love, being able to tick the boxes and see all these things appear. And we've got one person, Angela, who did her lead with us, who in an interview I did with her laughs because we have this tool on the front, a tag cloud, and it shows all the focus areas and they get bigger the more evidence you've got for them. And she doesn't like it when one of them is bigger than the others. So she comes back, she's like, right, got it. So we've got lots of little tools in there to help create little waypoints on these new paths. So that's really awesome. This work that you're doing is really good. And I love that you're talking to teachers about their brains, not just about their kids' brains. I think that's really important. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head here because you're not talking about teacher well-being in terms of go and have a yoga meditation, go and have a bath. And all of that is great. You do need to do all those things. But what we're talking about here is the way your brain is wired, the way you're seeing reality. Like you say, without all that toxic positivity going on, like, oh, well, just get on with it. The very British attitude of keep calm and carry on that we seem to be forced into right now with COVID, like how can we reframe it? And I think for me, that's something that I've always been quite good at in schools, having worked in England for a long time where there's constant battering from the government with, here's another bit of paperwork. I got really used to going, well, I'm not going to do that unless I can find a reason to do that for my greater purpose here. Those were your words. And I think with accreditation, that's what we do. We help the teachers to understand how that can connect to their greater purpose in their classroom. And their greatest purpose in their classroom is to have a positive impact on their kids. And to help them become whoever they need to be. And going back to the beginning, you can't do that if you're feeling really stressed all the time because it's hard. It's a really demanding emotional job. It's a relational job. And if you're not having a great relationship with yourself and you're not, not in a good place, it's really hard to have a great relationship with 32 kids. And as a high school teacher, different 32 kids every hour. Like that's a huge demand. That's a huge ask. So I think
I compare that to, almost carrying books, right? So for every negative thought or every, disempowering feeling or disempowering story, you're just like carrying these things with you all of the time. And it's a choice. What would happen if you just let go of your arms and just let all those books, right? Just dropped it. You just dropped it. You don't need to carry that with you. And to me, this kind of goes into something slightly, a little digression, but I think it's important here. We want to talk about self-care. This is how you take care of yourself. And there's this toxic culture in teaching right now that taking care of yourself is selfish. And my message here is that the least selfish thing that you can do is take care of yourself, because you're not taking care of anybody else if you are not taking care of yourself first. And that narrative, I will stand on any soapbox.
Yeah, I am with you. I'll join you. Yeah.
Yes.
I've been on the other end where I wasn't doing that. And then you just get burnt out and then you're just no good. Well, you're limping. You're limping along. You're doing something. It's not the best work, though.
You're worth so much more than that. Your value is so much more than that. You deserve so much more than that. And in wanting that for yourself, it's possible. And the work that I do is, I really am careful not to call it self-care, because it falls into that category of yoga and meditation, bubble baths, and it close their eyes, because it's ridiculous. You can't bubble bath your way to feeling better all of the time. It's great for that 40 minutes or whatever, but like, what happens afterwards? You're waking up at 3 a.m. worrying about the thing that happened yesterday. Yeah. Right.
Which if you'd have written down and reflected on, wouldn't be there waking you up at 3 a.m.
Exactly. So, this is really about taking care of yourself, understanding your brain, understanding that you have agency, you have choices that you get to make to really, again, show up and fulfill your purpose, why you want to do this in the first place.
Yeah. And reflective practice gives you the opportunity to do all of those things, doesn't it? When it comes to
if you're not reflecting, then you can't possibly know where you're at.
Exactly. No, you can't. Yeah. And then that comes down to even like assessment data. I've got assessment data. Well, if you're not reflecting on it, you don't know where the kids are at either. And this is what we want to be able to see and understand. This has been really awesome. Thank you so much. I knew this conversation would be fabulous. Obviously, we're going to have to get you back to talk about the process of making that choice change, or so you can really remove this overwhelm. We're going to have to do another podcast episode because it's exciting and I think it's brilliant. Thank you so much, Jen. Now, obviously, Jen, you can find Jen at jenrafferty.com. Is that right? How do we spell that, Jen, so we can get it sorted?
Sure. It's jenrafferty.com.
Brilliant. Is that the best place to find you? Or
that is a great place. And the other place to find me is at The Empowered Educator on Facebook. And you'll get lots of content from me and access to some of my lives that I do there and some trainings and all the good things that are going to come through the Empowered Educator program.
All the good things. Fantastic. And if you are someone working at lead level right now or a principal listening to this, I want you to hear what Jen is saying is coming up in this research. I want you to think about how you could create a program at your site where you make time and space and give permission for teachers to reflect, to write, to share, to put down the books, to reconnect with the choices that they're making, to make the unconscious conscious so that they get that space to make those choices, and maybe do a project to see what impact that has on self-care, if you want to call it that. What is the morale at your site going to be like if you do that for a couple of terms? And maybe Jen can help you out with that if you head to jenrafferty.com. Thank you so much, Jen. This has been an awesome chat.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.